I'm going to make one change in the addressing in the GLBP Lab. The virtual router's IP is actually going to be 172.12.13.10. We've got routers 1 and 3 on the Ethernet segment at 172.12.13, 1 and 3, respectively, /24. So let's go ahead and just dive right in and get GLBP started. First thing we have to do is name the group number, and we're going to do that. And one option here I want to show you that, like I said, we're not going to work with this one in your NA studies, but I want to show you the load balancing options again. And round robin is the default, and you'll see the description here, load balance equally using each forwarder in turn. Host dependent load balance equally, but the source MAC determines the forwarder choice. We're going to use that when a particular when our hosts need to have the same MAC address, the same virtual MAC address sent to them every single time in response to an ARP request. And then weighted, which is a powerful tool, you can balance in proportion to forwarder weighting. That really lets you tie down the percentage that each one is going to handle. So we've got our load balancing option there. You can give your group a name if you want to. That's fine. And timers, let me just show you those real quick. Again, as with HSRP, just something you're not going to change real often. There's no real need to. But if you do need to, here's the command. And the first number you put in is going to be the hello interval in seconds. So I'll just go ahead and put 10 right there for right now. And hold time in seconds, that's going to adapt so you can't set the hold time less than the hello time. And you just set that in seconds as well. And again, very rare that you're going to need the milliseconds option. And let's see, we've got preempt here again, overthrow lower priority designated routers. That's an interesting term. We usually really don't use the term DR except for, of course, OSPF. But that's the way the iOS mentions it, overthrow lower priority designated routers. But it's the exact same thing as preempt in HSRP. What we're going to work with right now is the IP command, enable group and set virtual IP address. So we will do that, and then 172.12.13.10, and that is it. And we're going to hop over to router 1 and do the exact same command. And we're going to hop back over to 3 and run show GLBP brief. And I wanted this to hurry up. I shouldn't have done a save there, but that's okay. We'll just wait. There we go. Show GLBP brief. And I'm glad we saw this because you can see this and it really throws you off when you're starting. It's like, well, why do I just have one line? You know, what's going on here? And you can see we've gotten a message there, GLBP state change, gone from standby to active. That sounds good. And now we've got 3 lines. And interestingly, one says we've got active, listen, and disabled. Then we have another state change. Group 10 forwarder 1 state has gone from listening to active. And now we've got active, active, listen here. So let's hang out here for a minute. I'm sure you know what this standby R at the end is, but just in case, standby router. And let's see if it's finished telling us anything for right now. Looks like it has. I'm going to give us a little room there because I know that is a screen full of information there. And run the same command. And earlier I believe I mentioned there was a show command that can be a little tricky or misleading or puzzling to look at, especially the first time. Well, this is it right here, show GLBP brief. And your first thought may be, well, if this is a little tricky to handle, Chris, why don't we just not run the brief option? Okay, we can do that. There's 1 screen of information, 2 screens of information, just on our little baby config that we've configured here. Now we're going to go through this too. There's some important information. I'm not mocking show GLBP, but the brief option does give you some good important information to get started. What I will do here is run the command here again. Jeez, show GLBP brief. New keyboard's going to have to go. And 1, GLBP brief. I'm going to run it on both of these so we can put these next to each other and see what's going on. And in router 3 we've got an active and a listen. Notice that they're all referring to the same interface, or fast 00 that is. And over on router 1 we have a standby and a listen and an active. So you look at this and it's like, and under address here I've got an IP address in one place and then I got MAC addresses in the other. So nothing really tricky here. Maybe a little puzzling. I know I'm kind of splitting hairs there, but here's what's going on. The reason this looks so different in the command from line 1 to the other lines is that the first line of show GLBP brief is actually referring to the AVG, the Active Virtual Gateway. The other lines that you see are referring to the AVFs. It just doesn't tell you that. Now you're supposed to be able to figure it out. There's one way to look at it right here and figure it out, and maybe you already had. Under forwarder, FWD for forwarder, we've got a dash next to this line, in this line, and then numbers after that. So that is one indication, and a subtle indication, I certainly grant you, because the first time I looked at this command, I was like, well, this is really weird. I've got priorities listed some places. I got IP and MAC addresses mixed up in the same column under address. What's going on here? So again, the first line under show GLBP brief, the one with the dash under FWD, which is almost always first. I don't think I've seen it at the bottom of the list. But when you see the dash here, it's referring to the AVG. And when you see a number under FWD, then it's referring to the actual forwarder. So while we've got this on the same screen with routers 1 and 3, let's just compare that first line. And here under router 3, you can see it says group 10, it is the AVG, priority 1 active, address of 172.12.13.10, active router local, and standby router is 172.12.13.1. Well, now that we know that's talking about the AVG, that makes perfect sense, because we know now that router 3 is the AVG in this group. It's active, it has a priority of 100, the virtual IP address is listed, it says active router local, so we know we're on it, and the standby router is named as being 13.1. When you look at that here in comparison with router 1, it's going to say, priority 100, group 10, forward to standby. It is standing by. It is the standby AVG. So if we had more than these two routers and the AVG went down, of course there would have to be a decision made there as to who takes over. Well, in this case there is no decision because there's only one other router. So router 1 is the standby. There's the virtual IP address again. It's going to tell you the active router is the actual AVG, and then the standby router is local. That is on priority, by the way. The highest priority wins that election of AVG. Since they're tied here at 100, we did not change the default of 100 on either one. That means the one with the highest IP address is going to become the AVG, and that was router 3. Now, as to the AVFs here, notice the subtle difference here. Let's look at this line. Forwarder 1 is active on router 3. Here's the address. Active router is local, and standby router, you're not going to see anything there. This means that router 3 is forwarder 1, and it is the active router for data sent to the MAC address 0007 B400 0A01. And notice we see the same address down here in router 1's output, but router 1 is marked as listen under state. That means it's listening, and if something happens to router 3, router 1 will step in and start handling data with the destination MAC of 0007 B400 0A01. That's where the listen comes in there. It's listening, and if it doesn't hear hellos from router 3 for that whole time, if 10 seconds by default, it's going to step in and say, okay, I'll handle that data. That's why you see the MAC address is the same under each router for show GLBP brief, but the states are different. Now, as to the other MAC address, you'll see forwarder 2, state is listen, and again, this is on router 3, and the address is just ticked up 1, 0007 B400 0A02. The active router is 13.1. So we know by looking at that router 1 is forwarder number 2 in this group, and hopefully it should be active for that particular MAC address. And we look down here and it certainly is. It's the active one. So right now, from this data, we know now by looking at it, We know exactly how to determine who the AVG is. That's going to be the line with the dash under forwarder. And then you can just look at each forwarder number that's assigned and see whether the local router that you're on is the active one for that particular MAC or if it's listening. And you know exactly which router is going to handle data for which address. We know now router 3 is going to handle data sent to the destination MAC that ends in 01, and router 1 is handling it for 02. Notice the format of that MAC address as well. And I'm sure you see a pattern there. It's not quite the same as HSRP, but there is a pattern there. They're going to begin with 0007B400, and then the next 4 values are determined by the group number in hex. That's the first 2 right here. That's why another reason you got to know your hex. And then this number is just simply the forwarder number. So it's going to be 0A and then 0A, 01, 0A, 02, etc. But that's where that 0A comes from. It is the group number in hex, and then it's just going to be followed by the number that was assigned to that particular router. So that is it for Show GLBP Brief. When we come back, for now, that is, when we come back, we're going to take one of these routers out of the mix and see how GLBP adapts to that. So I'll see you on the next video, and we'll mess around with that a little bit.